Welcome back to the channel and to the second part of my Fiesta ST repair series, where we'll be sorting out the cooling issues that I mentioned in part 1. In this video we'll be changing the coolant, along with a couple of other jobs I'm doing which will be in part 3 of this series, but this video will solely demonstrate a basic coolant change as part of a service. I'm mixing concentrated antifreeze with deionised water, but you may find it easier to buy pre-mixed. Start by undoing the cap on the expansion tank, then get underneath the car to access the bottom of the radiator. On some cars you may find a small plastic tap known as a petcock, but I never use them as they have a tendency to break. This Fiesta doesn't have one, and like all cars I'll be removing the bottom hose to drain the coolant from. This hose has a little marker so that you can see you've not got it back on twisted. I must apologise for the poor lighting here. When I refit the hose later you can see a lot better. As I don't have a hose clamp tool, I find the next best thing is a pair of mole grips, as they don't require you to keep pressure on the clamp to move it. The clamps on this car do lock open, which helps, but can make refitting a bit trickier as a compromise. I'm just moving the open clamp carefully along the hose, and I'm going to leave them hanging here as I drain the coolant, for why I'll explain shortly. You should always aim to remove the rad hoses by hand. They should come off with a little twist, but if they are stuck you can use something like a plastic trim tool, or even O-ring picks or a flathead screwdriver if you like to live dangerously. Fortunately, this smaller than I'm used to radiator hose comes off fairly easily, and thanks to leaving the mole grips attached to the hose clamp, it's helping to pull the hose down so I can let go and leave it to drain evenly without it springing back into position and spraying coolant all over the back of the rad and the bumper. Apparently the ST has 5.5 litres of the coolant capacity. I'm not doing a full flush, so there'll be roughly a litre left in the engine block and around the water pump. Since it's obviously cold, the thermostat would be closed, so we'll probably only get about 4 litres or so out of it. When it's drained, refit the bottom hose to the radiator, which should go over fairly easily as the coolant does lubricate it to some extent. Then secure the clamp. If it's the locking type like this one, aim to have it seated back into the indentations it made on the hose originally. Then release the clamp quickly. This will spring it past the lock like so. If you do it gently, it will remain locked open. I'll show the little locking tab on the clamp in a sec. Now to refill the system, I've mixed my 1 part antifreeze, which you need to replace colour for colour, red for red in this case, to 2 parts distilled or deionised water. You may wish to have yours at 1:3 or 50-50 at your preference. I'm going to talk about using deionised water in a few moments. You'll want to fill the expansion tank slowly to allow some air to be pushed out naturally until it eventually remains filled to the max line. You can fill it past max, as we will be running it with the cap off, and it will almost certainly need more after a hot and cold cycle. Not all radiators have them, but this Fiesta's has a bleed valve near the centre of the upper inlet tank. You should undo this now. Even before starting, the level in the tank has dropped, so I'm topping up again before starting the car. Inside the car, put the heater onto its hottest setting to make sure the heater matrix circulates coolant. Turn the fan off or have it on low for the moment, as it will actually act the same way as a radiator fan's cooler system, and we want to get it hot for now. To repeat, we're leaving the expansion cap off, bleed valve open and the heater on hot as we start the car from cold. You may notice that I've removed the headlamp. This is because I'm doing other jobs on the car, but for the purposes of a coolant change you won't need to do this. For now, it's a waiting game for the car to warm up, where we should see some aerated coolant come out of the bleed valve and it circulate back into the header tank. Back inside the car, we're already showing 3 bars on the temp gauge, which is its lower normal range. It's worth periodically checking the heater to see if it gets warmer, as an indicator that there's no airlock in the heater matrix and coolant is flowing properly when not pressurised. Stone cold. After about 5 to 10 minutes you should see the flow of coolant in the expansion tank, and we can feel heat in the various hoses. Please mind your hands on the pulleys if you do have them exposed like this, as well as the fans behind the radiator. I'm curious where this return pipe goes, as it's unusually thin and modern cars are a bit of a learning curve for me. It seems to disappear off towards the bulkhead. It's possibly going near the turbo, as the exhaust manifold is at the back on a Ford, and I think modern turbos are cooled rather than just leaving it for the oil to do. Still nothing from the bleed valve yet, so we'll check the radiator top hose. It's still cold, which makes sense, as this is where the hot coolant returns to the radiator. Top hose is stone cold. Now the car is fully up to temperature, showing 4 bars, which is usual on a Fiesta. I saw a full 8 bars a couple of times when the bypass valve was blocked. Oh, heater is warm now. So with it blowing warm air, there's no airlock and it's time to put the cap on. There's a pressuriser system. It's a little tight as the tank plastic has expanded because of the heat, but the cap is still cold. It takes a lot of turns to screw down, and I'm surprised it doesn't have a pressure release cap, so it's important to keep the level no higher than max now. We can also close the bleed valve at the top of the radiator, as we're now seeing aerated water coming through, and the top hose is now warm as well. Ignore what I'm doing and wear some gloves as this water is hot. Oh, I've just noticed this breather hose, or whatever it is out of place. This is optional, but I'm going to rev the car up for a minute to get the pump moving and keep checking the heater is getting as hot as it should. Now might be a good time to mention a little experiment I'll be doing soon on the differences between using tap water, distilled, and deionised water in your cooling system. I've only ever used the two latter, as tap water is usually hard, which means it has a high mineral content, mainly calcium and magnesium sulfate or bicarbonate. However, I recently read on a forum that using deionised water may cause the water to react with certain metals, similar to how it can pull minerals from your body if you drank it, and that you should only use distilled. I'm going to test this by submerging a heater core into each water type and heating it to 90 degrees on a regular basis, and compare the differences between the three after a period of a couple of months, or however long it takes to see results. Please make sure you're subscribed to be notified of this video when it's eventually done, and let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions, your own findings of using certain water types, or just to let me know if you like the sound of it. The heater is now toasty warm, so that should be enough. We can see some air has made its way to the expansion tank, so once it's cooled, we'll give it its final top up to max, and that's the coolant change done. Thanks very much for watching.